This AskReddit user asks, when did you experience culture shock? Not sure if this is culture shock so as to say, but when I was at uni in Tokyo, what most shocked me is how it always gets dark around a similar time throughout the year. Whereas in the UK it stays light really late in the summer and gets dark really early on the winter. On the other hand, I had a friend's dad, who is Japanese, tell me the thing that shocked him most about British people is that very few people put an umbrella up when it rains and are just fine with a raincoat or getting a bit wet. Being from the east coast of the US, I experienced a similar kind of culture shock about rain when I went to Israel. I went in December, so there was snow piled up everywhere at home, and in Israel it was in the 70s. When we got hit by some light drizzling, our host was apologizing for our trip hitting such poor weather, and they were shocked to learn that we thought of it as rather mild. The fact that I declined an umbrella and elected to just enjoy the rain was especially surprising to them. My first full day in China, and I was exploring the French concession of Shanghai. There's a rather pretty old house, now a free museum, where the founding of the Communist Party happened. I walked in and saw a little girl, probably about 7 years old, excitedly look at a mural and ask her parent which one's Mao Zedong, as if he was a hero she'd love to commemorate, even though I knew his portrait was at Tiananmen. He was on all the money, etc. It hadn't yet dawned on me that even little kids in China were taught to admire someone we don't exactly see as a good guy anywhere outside the Middle Kingdom or the Hermit Kingdom. The Caribbean. I was 6 or so at the time. We were staying at a hotel which was connected to the public's beach. Each day the beach boys would be shouting over the wall for anyone and everyone to come trade with them. Me being as young as I was thought it was all friendly. TBH. It was friendly. I spent every day bartering my childhood toys, Mighty Max playsets FTW, with them for different things like seashells. Wasn't until I was a bit older I understood the items I traded them would have been some amazing ST they had never seen before and probably turned a tidy profit on. That was a wake-up call. In my country, Spain, people doesn't drive so good. But in Italy is the HL. What's more, all Italians I met told me they have a lot of anxiety when they should drive. My dad grew up in the Bronx, near New York City, and is very used to highly aggressive drivers. He was terrified when he went to Italy. The tour guide said that when you want to cross the street, and no one's letting you through, just start walking, they'll have to stop. That is way too intense for me. Really. I live in NYC and drove through Italy for 2 weeks about a year ago, including through the heart of Rome, in a stick shift, which I was a bit rusty using. The drivers were fine. You'd still rather be driving there than Manhattan. Here in Brazil, it depends on the city you are. Some cities you will get run over if you try to cross the streets when no one let you through. In others you may be the only one waiting to cross and there is no car behind. The one car will still stop for you, compliment you and wish you a good day. In Jamaica I went outside the recommended area into a local town with some family. It wasn't a huge deal for me because I'm a pretty big guy, so I wasn't too worried about something happening. We didn't get too far. We were a group of white people, so we stuck out pretty easily. Instantly the women in the group felt very uncomfortable. People left and right were coming up to us trying to sell us drugs and whatever else they had. You could almost feel the stares from the locals looking at the blonde light-skinned girls we were with. There were people literally sleeping in the curbs on the street. There were lots of Rastas, very unlike from what American culture shows them to be. Just standing there doing nothing with super long dirty dreads. Eyes bloodshot, obviously high out of their minds. There was a bus that went by with some guys leaning out the window reaching for us. That's when everyone decided to go back. I think most of us were more comfortable with our tropical music and piña coladas. It would have been cool to explore more and just see what it was like, but nobody really was aware of exactly where we were going, and it was better to just play it safe. Side note. I don't write this to try shame or degrade any Jamaican person. It was a great place mostly, and there were many great locals and people there. There were also just some very sketchy locals there on the bad side of town, just like anywhere else. We were in Jamaica on a cruise one time and had gotten off the ship to take a bus up to some resort place to zipline and do a Jamaican bobsled ride. I will never forget my son going, "Mom, what's that guy doing?" and pointing at the window. It was a dude standing in a ditch beside the road, using one hand to guide his ween while he peed, the other to wave at us as we drove by, and his goats were just wandering around doing whatever goats do. Made me go ook then. Quote, there were also 84,000, or at least it seemed that way, handmade signs for bars and naked girly joints alongside the road as we went from the port Montego Bay to the resort Ocos Rios. Made me wonder if anybody did anything else besides hang out in bars and girly joints. I am not surprised you saw that LMAO. And yes, there was lots of nude stuff. Many PS pipes and bongs were being sold. Happened across the PS pipes, bongs, naked lady coffee mugs a lot in Mexico too. When I was in Honduras, we were at a shop buying something, and there was a little wooden statue of a man wearing a barrel over his bottom half with a note that said, "Lift here." Quote, of course I had to lift it, and as soon as I did, his little wooden PS was sticking out at me. My parents and I came to the US from the Philippines when I was a couple months old. Last year was the first time I'd ever been to the Philippines. Pretty much never been outside of the US before then. Was totally humbled the moment I walked out of the airport to the day I got on the plane out of there. We went around Manila with one of my mom's brothers in the middle of the night. No seat beats. Too many people walking around at night for my taste. We went to a restaurant that night and I had to go to the restroom. Found out that there were no toilet seats, and this was the norm in every public place I went. Next morning, we had to go on a little trip outside Manila. Saw a lot of people sitting on boxes in cheap shirts. That and houses made out of metal sheets. Shops made out of wooden boards. And once again, way too many people out and about for my liking. Only in the daytime. After that, realized really quickly that I was totally privileged. Still am. Also a stranger in my own home. Since I never learned Tagalog. Though I wouldn't mind having to walk around to go to a shop or something. Every time I check the comments under US politicians' posts on social media. These people think weapons are a human right, but wearing a mask is brutal tyranny. Police brutality, on the other hand, is fine. I don't get America. I think the way they live is literally dystopia. That's not all of us, but rather one half of a cultural divide. Can confirm. We've a strong sense of local community. Though that seems to be fading. But at a national level we're all at each other's throats. It's bad now, and it's gonna get worse before it gets better. A different experience than most. I am a deaf guy. I grew up going to mainstream schools. Mainstream is lingo for being in class with other hearing students. Or everyone else. When I graduated high school, I yearned to find pride in my deafness. I decided to go to RIT. Holy ST. My eyes got tired within the first hour. Communication was so open and accessible. People chatting everywhere in a language I understood. By the end of the year, I fully assimilated into deaf culture. My wife, who knew me as a friend at the time, remembered how shitty my signing was. Now that I've been exposed 24/7, I am completely fluent, as if native. I'm from Salt Lake City and I recently went on a trip to San Francisco. Yeah. It was like going home. It's so conservative in Utah it's stifling. But walking around SF and seeing all the different people and hearing the sounds of the ocean at the pier. It was incredible. Not to mention basically every business I went to had rainbow flags and there was actual history there and not just revisionist Mormonism. Holy St. Same thing happened to me. I never wanted to leave that place. I actually skipped down the streets because nobody was staring at me. It was a good time. I'd go back. And if I ever get a job offer, I'd definitely take it. As someone who once lived in California and now lives in Salt Lake had the opposite experience. Moving to Utah was so strange to me. I remember going across the border from Alberta to Montana and being shocked at how many FG abortion and gun billboards there were. And Alberta is pretty conservative. You hardly ever see billboards in rural Canada. And even in the cities they are rarely, if ever, political. A more obvious one was Cairo. Because that place is the living embodiment of unsustainable. I got a culture shock when I drove down to Vancouver. One of the most beautiful landscapes absolutely destroyed by hundreds of billboards ranging from political hit pieces to random advertising. Never seen it anywhere else. Got back to the US. Seeing grass rather than hard sand and air that wasn't literally the smell of rotting fish. Cow St. Human St. and humans that have never bathed in their life made me feel like I was in heaven. Going to an inner-city community college after growing up the burbs. Moving from wealthy suburbs to an inner-city neighborhood was a huge change. Now I couldn't imagine going back. It's so boring out there. When I was young, my family was kinda poor. We had just enough to survive and be comfortable. But not much beyond that. In my country, private schools are usually better than the public one and vice versa for the universities. I passed a test that let me study in a private school for free. Normally the wages were very high and totally out of my family league. These kids has it all. They didn't know how life was. They didn't walk the streets. They couldn't do simple tasks. They didn't need to work to help at home. I was baffled when I saw one throwing a sandwich away cause a fly had touched it. I went to a friend's house and it was enormous and only 4 people lived on it. After some time, I learned to understand them better. Kind of someone else's culture shock. But when I was younger, I was in a summer camp and had made friends with a girl who I think was from Norway. Somewhere around there. This was only her second week in the U.S. So the day started, and we were pledging allegiance to the flag. I saw the look on her face. She was taken off guard and had clearly never seen this before. She had a funny expression. I could tell she really didn't know what to do. When the pledge ended and attendance was called, I asked her if she had a pledge where she was from. She shook her head and told me she was kind of disturbed by us all chanting together and assuming the same pose towards our flag. She said she didn't have the English word for it. But she did like the cult worship gesture where you praise something in the middle of a circle of people. She said we had a weird obsession with our flag and that it creeped her out. I remember seriously rethinking patriotism that day. Good. The pledge is definitely a pretty strange thing for me as a foreigner. Father in the U.S.A.F. moved to San Antonio the summer between 8th and 9th grade. I walked into the auditorium for freshman orientation and there was not a blonde head to be seen. School was 98% Mexican. Not me, but I was watching KSI, a British YouTuber that's black. And my brother walked by and asked why this guy had a British accent. I told him he's a British person. To which my brother was visibly confused. Turns out he didn't think black people lived in Britain. Or much of the world in general, and just assumed they only lived in Africa and North America. Used an airport toilet when I arrived in Japan. There are so many buttons on those things and I didn't know the kanji for flush. Tried a button. It made rainforest sounds. Imagined what would happen if I unknowingly pressed the bidet button and water splashed all over my face. After about 3 minutes of anxiety, I left without flushing. I eventually learned the language comfortably enough. FYI, if you're ever in this situation. You press xiao for small flush and da for big flush. Google Translate saved me so many times in Japan. The translations were horrible, but they were good enough to figure out soap and food in the grocery store and controls on the air conditioner, etc. I remember using it for my air conditioner too. That too has way too many buttons on it. What's with Japan and all the buttons? I remember we were trying to figure out a Japanese washing machine once and we used Google Translate. The two machines were labeled, according to Google Translate, washing and combustion. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.